What's up, creeps, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror channel with me, BP. On this video, I'm getting nostalgic and I want you all to get nostalgic with me. I'm going to give you 10 moments in horror that have always stuck with me ever since I was a kid. You know, as a kid, you're impressionable, and I definitely was. As a kid walking around in the 80s and 90s thinking he was Zach Morris, I was already obsessed with the horror genre from a way too young age, like so many of us did. And there are always moments, scenes, or multiple reasons as to why certain things in horror stand out to you and stand out and scar your mind for the rest of it, even to the point where you go and watch these films now and you're still taken back to the moment that you first watched it and they first stuck with you. And that's what I want to get into a little bit. So as I say, here is 10 moments that have always stuck with me, and trust me, there's a lot more, but let's get into it. The Shining, the twins. So this is a moment that a lot of people will always have on the list. It is one of the most iconic scenes or images ever put to screen, put into horror and cinema in general. It was also, obviously, The Shining is one of the very rare occasions in cinema history, once again, not just in horror, that we have had what I consider a perfect movie. There is not a single thing that you can change or do to say about this movie that's not perfect. It has perfect performances, it has perfect imagery and cinematography, the directing, the editing, everything in this film, for me personally, is perfect, and it works so well. And obviously one of the most standout scenes of that would be the twins. Our introduction to them, or the way that they come onto the screen once again, is the reason why we never forget about them. Danny's got on his little bicycle trike thing going around the corner, and then the twins are there at the end. And already as a kid, when you're watching it, because remember, all of these memories I'm talking about are ones that stuck with me ever since I was a kid and I watched these for a first time. So as a kid, I was sitting there watching it, and already you've got the music going, you've got these long corridors that all look the same, it's very claustrophobic, and then he goes around the corner and there they are. The twins are standing there and both dressed exactly the same. It's just, you know, the imagery that we get from The Shining, there's something so haunting about it. And then it goes one step further because the editing is so incredible, and it has those flashes of, you know, where they're on the floor, dead, blood everywhere. And it's these quick flashes and you do see it, but at the same time, once again, you almost feel like Danny at that point. It's so well made that you almost feel like Danny at that point, where if this is what he's seeing, and it's not just a depiction of what we're supposed to see as the viewer, if it's what he's seeing and what he's terrified of, you're there with him. And it's a scene that has never, ever lost my mind. The Shining, weirdly, I don't know why, but it is a comfort movie for me, so it sort of shows how messed up I am in the brain. But it's such an incredible movie, and there are so many standout moments. But that moment, for everything that it is and for everything that it does to you on a psychological side, it's incredible. It's perfect. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface's intro. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was another film that I watched very early on in my life. Another film that I definitely shouldn't have. And it is one of those films that has definitely traumatized so many people. Luckily for me, because of outside of all of this, and from a very, very young age, I have always wanted to be and will continue to want to be an actor and a filmmaker. So I've had it in my brain from a very young age that I really, really fully understood that what I'm watching isn't real. It's all just essentially, you know, people doing a job, and they're there to provide the best entertainment that they can for you, if you can call it that. But it's still entertainment, no matter how it makes us feel. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of those films where it was actually quite difficult for me to differentiate what was real and what wasn't. And that is something that I've always really applauded the film for, that even to this day, it's so gritty, so grimy, so real looking, that is part of the terror. There are some insane things that happen in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. especially with a family at the dinner table, that can kind of take you out of it, makes it feel a bit more theatrical. But there are moments in it, like this one I'm going to talk about, and you know which one I'm going to talk about, that really, really have an impact on you, especially as a kid, that make you think, hang on a minute, is this real? And obviously that's the Leatherface's intro, where the guy goes into this house, this dirty, grimy, Ed Gein-esque house. He goes in there, and then next thing you know, Leatherface pulls this door open, goes out, this huge guy, incredibly intimidating, goes out, donks him over the head with the hammer, and then drags him back in and slams this door. And one of the most effective things about this is not just because the imagery is so violent and feels so real, it's the sound that always sticks with me. It's the sound of him opening the door. It's the sound that he makes when he hits the guy over the head. It sounds so real that that's why I think so many people at the time, and still to this day, probably think that maybe that was real. It's so easy to see why, because the sound is so realistic. And then it goes in and he slams that door. You know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of those films that doesn't really have like a lot of music in it, if anything. And that really plays on it, because once again, it gives this level of realism, this documentary sort of style of filmmaking to it that stylistically, you know, plays with you psychologically. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre really is one of those films that does that, and it's always stuck with me, always will. I love it. I know there's a lot of people that might not, but even from the opening scene in the graveyard, in the sweltering heat, and you've got these bodies, it's a wild ride you're on. And that scene that I'm talking about, with Leatherface's introduction, with the hammer, with the sound, with the imagery, with how vicious and ferocious it is, and how intimidating Leatherface is, I'll never forget it. The Fly, Brundle Die. So The Fly is a film that I absolutely love, and I'm mesmerised with every time I watch it, whether that's the performances, the cinematography, the editing. It's another film that feels very perfect to me, but it also has some of the greatest special effects that have ever been put on the film. But it's not really all of that really is one of the moments that sticks with me. What sticks with me is, and it's going to sound weird, is how sad the film makes me feel at the end of it. And that's obviously when Jeff Goldblum's character, obviously Brundle Fly, he's there, he's fully transformed into this absolute monstrosity that he's become, and he can no longer deal with it, and he has just enough brain to turn around and say to Gina Davis, look, you know, kill me, basically. And it's so sad, because you're following this person on this journey from the start, who was just a normal scientist who's trying to do this and trying to achieve this, and then it happens, and then he gets a bit big for his own boots, and he's still in this relationship with this woman that he quite clearly loves at the start, but his work and his life like that takes over from it. And it's a really sad story, because, you know, it becomes about essentially greed of him trying to do what he can, but also it becomes about what he's becoming is turning him into something completely different. And that's what happens at the end, is that he realizes that, and as I said, he's got enough brain to turn around and say, just end it for me, because I don't want to live like this. And it's really sad, and that's one of the moments that have always really stood out to me ever since I was a kid, was just the iconography, yes, of, you know, the incredible special effects and how it all happens, and what, you know, and when it happens and so on. But it's just such a sad thing. And even from a young age, that was the thing that really, you know, got me the most on an emotional impact. That's where it got me. As much as, you know, the film is incredible on a movie standpoint and on special effects and everything like that, it was the emotional impact that it had on me, that this person had become this monster, and this monster no longer wants to be. And it was, you know, it's sad. It's such an amazing movie, The Fly. I think it's a film that doesn't really get talked about enough about, in regards to being one of those films that's up there as being perfect. There's not many of those films, and it's very difficult to justify saying when a film is, but The Fly is definitely one of those that I feel could be. But you know, from that movie, the scene is, and the moment is, the emotional impact that it had on me. The Thing, Blood Test. So when we're talking about perfect movies, you don't get more perfect than The Thing. The Thing is one of the greatest movies that's ever been made. And I can see why it is, for so many people, the greatest movie that's ever been made on their lists. It is beyond incredible, this movie is. And one of the things that's obviously beyond incredible is the special effects. In The Thing, the special effects are the greatest that have ever been put on screen, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of the films that I talk about on this list, is a lot of the moments do come because of the special effects and so on. And that's because horror has always done it best, but also the imagination that you have as a kid and the awe that you're in when you're watching the screen and these things are happening that you've never seen before. It blows your mind, and it's one of the things that imprints horror into your mind, and has imprinted horror into so many of our minds. It has for me. So special effects, all that sort of stuff has always been a really, really big influence on me as a person in regards to how I love and look at horror. And we got, obviously, in the 70s and 80s and so on, we got so much of that, especially in the 80s. We got so many of these incredible people making incredible things and putting it onto screen for us to be mesmerized by. And The Thing is a big, big shining example of that. But sometimes it's not just about those incredible scenes in The Thing, whether it's the big, you know, monster at the end and the climax, or whether it's the dogs and they get taken over by this thing and the tentacle things are going everywhere. Sometimes it's the smaller moments in the movie. And the thing that has always stayed with me, and I think one of the most perfect scenes in cinema history, is the blood test scene. It's incredible. The way that John Carpenter creates tension and dread and unpredictability of not understanding what's going to happen, where it's going to go. He is the master of that. And it's no more apparent than it is in The Thing in this scene. When they're all sitting there and they're tied, and McGrady is going through the blood with, you know, heating it up a bit to see what's going on and who is going to be, you know, the thing, who's infected. It's insane. And you are sitting there and you just feel like you're fully immersed within this environment. You feel like you're there, you're sweating, it's just so intense. It's unbelievable. It's difficult, as you can tell, it's quite difficult to even put into words how incredible that scene is and how much I love watching it. But when they're all sitting there and nothing happens, and the guy, you know, who's the, I always forget his name, but he's cop or the sheriff guy, who's the guy that's there, really, the law that's there. And, you know, he's essentially saying, it's not me, get me off. And then he does it, and then it goes like that, and it goes mental. And then you find out that one of them is, and it's the guy that's stuck, and they're on the bench with him while he's going, and he's transforming and going mental. It's so unpredictable. It's absolutely insane, and I absolutely love it. But you feel so trapped within that movie, and that is one of the scenes where you feel trapped within a movie that continues to keep you trapped and claustrophobic, because these people, you know, when you're watching these films, especially I do, I sit there and I think about what I would be like if I was in that situation, and then that creates the anxiety within me, because I sit there and I'm like, what if I was one of those people that was sitting on the bench waiting to get my blood tests, and I don't actually know whether it's going to be me that's the thing. But if it's not, I'm still stuck to one of these two guys that is. It's insane. You know, it's unbelievably an incredible scene, incredible movie. Once again, it is, for me personally, a perfect movie. The Thing, amazing. But that scene, the blood test scene, is a moment I'll never forget. Scream, a killer reveal. So Scream is one of the most iconic horrors of all time, especially of the 90s. It is a film that had a huge influence on me, especially as a teen. I think I watched this as I was becoming a teenager, like 12, 13, and I tried to emulate everything about this film. As a filmmaker, I was already going around with, like, say, a handheld camera, trying to do little scenes with where I was pretending to be Billy. I mean, look, I had the curtains, the white tight t-shirts, the black boots, everything, because I just was in love with it. It was such a new, fresh take on horror that I'd never seen before. And it just made it really cool again. Wes Craven is the master of just creating something that feels new, fresh, something that's cool. And Scream was no exception to that. I absolutely love Scream. It is a comfort watch for me. I know it is for so many people. But how iconic and so many scenes there are in that film, one of the things that's never going to leave my brain is the reveal of the killers at the end, because it's not just about who it is, it's about how they do it, and how they always keep within the understanding of what the film is and what it's trying to be and how meta it is. It's just so cool. You know, you think for 1 minute Billy's dead, even though all along, you know, he's acted essentially like a psycho. Same as Matthew Lillard's character, you know, Stu. They always act like it is, but you think that's like a red herring. You think that that's to throw you off. When it ends up not being something that throws you off, it blows your mind, because you have gone from a point of expecting it, but yet still part of you doesn't. And then it happens, and then you're like, well, I was sort of right all along, but I felt like I shouldn't be. But you were. But just how it all happens, where, as I say, you think Billy's dead, he rolls down the stairs, and then, you know, and then it all happens. You know, he quotes Psycho. He becomes even more of a psycho than what he is. Skeet Ulrich in Scream is absolutely fantastic. I mean, he's good in pretty much anything he does, but he's so fantastic in Scream. By the whole film plays you on that edge of creating this sort of psycho character, and how you think he's a little bit off, but he could just be a bit weird. And he's trying to make, you know, they're trying to make you think that way a little bit. But then when it all happens and the reveal happens, he is completely unhinged. He becomes this proper villain, this proper psycho. And he's essentially got his best mate Stu with him along it, who feels like a bit more like a follower of Billy. You know, he doesn't feel like he's as psychotic as Billy. I think that's, you know, pretty much common knowledge. But once again, you get the reveal that it's two of them, and it's incredible. But it's that whole scene from the point where Billy announces essentially it's him, then Stu comes out with the voice changer. It's so cool, it's so new, it's so fresh. The way that it's shot, it's incredible. And for that whole scene as well, of the end of just that scene where they're in the kitchen and the reveal, it's so well scripted. You know, everything that they say is just either really, really dark and sinister, or ridiculously enjoyable, like anything that comes out Stu's mouth at that point, where it's like, oh, my mum's going to be so mad at me, and all those sort of signs of things. And when he throws this phone at him, and he's just, you know, it's such an iconic scene, and it's so easy to see why Scream is one of everybody's favourite movies of all time. It really restarted horror again and gave it new life. And as a teen, I was mesmerised by it. I was in awe of it, and it was, you know, became, outside of the film, it became a big part of my life, because I was just like, this is cool, and I want to be a big part of that. So Scream, I love it. The reveal is a moment that I will never ever forget. Candyman. So Candyman is one of my favourite films of all time, and it is also a film that I watched way too young. This is a film that I remember, yeah, I was so young when I watched this, but because I was so already influenced by acting and filmmaking, that it didn't really bother me what sort of film I watched, no matter how scary it was supposed to be or what type of film it was. But what I love about Candyman is, I mean, it is a film that I don't think gets talked about enough, but mostly in regards to how incredibly made this movie is. This film is a proper film. This isn't just, you know, people who don't really know what they're doing, going around making a horror film, you know, without much talent. That there's so much talent within this movie. It's incredible. So one of the things that always stays with me about this film is how incredibly well directed it is, and the score is absolutely incredible. It's a theme that never leaves my head, and I absolutely love it, and I think it was my ringtone for a long time. But the scene that stands out to me is our introduction to Candyman himself. And that is purely because of Tony Todd. Tony Todd in this film gives one of the best and one of my favourite performances of all time. It's so, there's something so romantic about it. There's something so subtle about his performance. It's incredibly sexy. And he is just a huge, intimidating powerhouse of a man who has this beautiful voice that, no, at some point, you know, it's like he could read you bedtime stories, but then also could read you, you know, the most horrific thing that's ever happened, and you would be absolutely terrified. There's something about him and the way that they utilize him and his character and his voice within the first time you sort of meet him, when it's in the car park. And it's like in the day, so it makes it even scarier. Like, it's not at night. Yes, he's within the shadows and they play with it, but that's the lighting, you know. But it's within the day, and that's terrifying because you know, these things aren't supposed to happen during the day. These are supposed to happen at night at the scariest point, and that's what makes it even more intimidating, is the fact that he's out there during the day. And, you know, it's such an incredible scene, but it's all sold by Tony Todd and his performance, the way that he walks, the way that he talks, and the subtle little things that they're putting on his vocals at that point where it elevates it so it's almost cathedral. You know, there's so much that goes into Candyman that a lot of people don't realise or don't see. And if you haven't seen it for a while, go back to it. It's such an incredibly well-made film with so many layers to it. But Tony Todd in that scene, his introduction is something that will always, always stay with me. I love Candyman. It's truly a great film. But Tony Todd in that movie is insanely good. Gremlins, bar scene. So Gremlins is one of my most watched movies of all time. I love it. Gremlins is one of those films that you can literally put on and enjoy. If people don't think it's a horror, that's fine. I think it's personally a horror. It's just a fun horror. But if you don't, that's fine. It is what it is. But I do. And that's why it's in this list. And ever since I was a kid, I have watched this film so many times. I literally had 2 VHS tapes of it because I wore one out. And it's even the case and everything I still remember in my brain, and it's so incredible. And there are so many amazing scenes within Gremlins, and once again, it's the artistry of it, it's the iconography of it, because all these gremlins and that are things, and they look so good, they look so real. Even to this day, they look absolutely incredible. So much more than what CGI could ever give us. So if there's ever another Gremlins, you know, and I hope there is, sort of, I just hope that they go back to this style of filmmaking and this style of making these real monsters that are really there, and all these actors have got to play off that, and they do such a fantastic job, everyone in this. And there's so many standout scenes in Gremlins for me, but obviously the standout scene is always going to be the bar scene, because there's so much that goes on with that. There's so much with what Phoebe Cates as the character is trying to deal with everything that's going on, and trying to serve drinks to these gremlins, which is insane on its own. Like, all these gremlins are just in the bar getting absolutely off their face, and it's just all of the characters that are in there. You've got the guy that's almost like, I don't know if he is, but I've always thought of him like a Ted Bundy-esque, because he's got this balaclava on and he's got the gun and he's, you know, he's trying to shoot. You've got the poker player ones. You've got the guy that's swinging around on the thing, the one that's drinking beer and his belly's getting big. It's just, it is so much fun. It's ridiculous that this is a film that you watch as a kid, you grow up loving, you continue to love, and you just feel like a kid every time you watch it. And then you show your kid, and that cycle continues. And as I say, there's so many scenes within Gremlins that's amazing, but the bar scene is the best and one of the best, and something that I will never forget and love every single time I watch it. Misery, ankle smash. So in horror, there's always scenes that are super messed up. And this scene, the ankle break from Misery, is no exception. This is one of the scenes that, like I said, like within horror, there's blood, there's guts, there's arms flying, you know, getting cut off and sawn off, and legs and heads, and everything goes, and anything goes in horror. But for some reason, there's something so visceral, so vicious about this ankle break and ankle smash scene in Misery. I mean, the film itself is absolutely phenomenal. It's iconic. It's such a great movie, and there's so much tension and dread, and I think that helps lead up to this scene and how you feel about it. But it's the fact that it doesn't shy away from it. It shows you it, and you're actually expecting it to not show you, because you're like, there's no way that they can show you somebody smashing somebody's ankle in with a hammer, with a piece of wood in the middle. Like, there's no way they can show you it. They're just going to show his face in pain, or Annie's face, you know, enjoying what she's doing, or whatever. But they don't. They show it, and it. When I first saw it, I remember sitting there and I was stunned. My jaw dropped. I could not believe it, and still to this day, when I watch it, I have the same reaction, because I'm like, how were they allowed to show this? I know, once again, it's not one that shows all the blood and shows all the guts, and that's probably why they may have got away with it. But it's the impact that has on you as the viewer watching that film. I know people that have passed out, and there's people out there that have been sick from that scene, and it's absolutely insane the impact, as I say, that has had on so many people. And it had an impact on me. I never forgot it. I never forgot that scene. And even when I watch it now, it blows my mind. It's an insane scene, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. And every time I watch it, I feel like my ankles are broken. You know, you feel the pain. You feel that pain that he's going through at that point. And it's not a nice thing. Halloween, stick around. So this is the second appearance of a movie from the iconic, the legendary John Carpenter. And this is obviously, I mean, one of the most iconic horrors of all time. A lot of people will say it is the greatest horror film of all time, and it's difficult to argue with that. This film, like, what's insane about John Carpenter movies is that, like, the premise, the way, the story of Halloween isn't exactly the most intricate thing. There's not loads and loads of layers, you know, like, you know, especially to the first one. Obviously they tried adding layers to the rest, and that's where it all got all kinds of messed up and sucked. But from the first one, it's a very simple idea, but because it has John Carpenter at the helm, it becomes so much more. It becomes about the script with Deborah Hill and creating these amazing characters that you root for. It creates, you know, he creates this world so well of these small towns where you feel like you're a part of, and you know that place. John Carpenter is so good at that. But also, Halloween to this day has some of my most amazing visuals and cinematography I have ever seen in my life. Dean Cundy, obviously, who was a cinematographer on Halloween, is a master at it. And we get these beautiful steady cam, and it's one of the first films to sort of use this sort of steady cam. We get these amazing wide angle shots of Michael Myers walking across the, you know, across the street to trying to get to Laurie's house, or wherever he's going, or whatever's happening. It's such a beautiful film. So you can look at those moments in general and take any of them and say, you're in awe of it. It's going to be stuck with you. This whole film, to be fair, is a film that gets stuck with you. But obviously, there's that scene. You know, the knife scene where Michael Myers sticks the guy against the wall, although possibly physically impossible. I mean, you know, Michael might just be double R'd and be able to do it. But it is just, once again, horror iconography that you never forget. The fact that Nick Castle stood there and added, you know, it wasn't something that he was supposed to do. He just added the little head tilt that's now become iconic, not just for that scene, but for Michael Myers and horror. You can't help but wear a Michael Myers mask or any horror mask and stand there and do like a little head tilt. You know, it's iconic. It's integral to the existence of horror. Michael Myers and Halloween, the original Halloween, is so important to the horror genre. But that scene is, once again, one of those scenes that will always live on up here. And every time I watch it, it brings back that nostalgia of the first time I watched it. And when I continue to watch it with a friend of mine who was also really into Halloween, and we watched it all the time, every Halloween season, we loved it, and we would sit there and cheer every time, you know, when you're a kid and you get right into it and that scene happens, and it's incredible. So like so many people, that scene, we never forget it. Evil Dead Glide Cam. So for me personally, The Evil Dead is the greatest horror franchise there is out there, because we may not have the quantity like there is of Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. We've only had 5 movies of The Evil Dead, but every single one is about the quality. Every single one, for me personally, has been a 5-star movie. So when you have a franchise that has 5 movies that are 5-star movies, there is so many moments that you can look back on and you don't forget, whether that's from Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, or the later versions, or the, you know, the newer additions to the franchise. There's so many that you can look at. But this is where I go right back to the start of my journey through horror. So The Evil Dead was a film, and I believe it was the 2nd horror film that I ever saw. Where I lived, we were very, very lucky where we had 2 blockbusters. One was a 10-minute, if that, drive from me, but I had a blockbuster that was literally 4 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes walk from where I was. In fact, it was a 30-second walk from my school. And when I was really young, it was like my place to go. I was in awe of it every time I went in there, and a lot of that was because of the iconography of the covers. I loved all the covers and the posters that they used for the horror films. A lot of it was all, you know, the hand-drawn and painted, and it was all incredible, and it really drew me in. The aesthetics of horror is something that's always been integral to my love for it from a very young age. And then when I watched the films, it drew me in even more, and I was obsessed with it. And The Evil Dead, the first one, is the one that did it for me, because it showed me things that not only had I never seen before, but it showed me things that I had no idea of how. And that's what the moment is. It's weird, but out of everything that The Evil Dead has shown us and given us, and these moments, the moment that always sticks with me is the moment that made me want to be a filmmaker. And that is the glide cam when it goes across the lake or the river, whatever you want to call it, and it's going across it. But then it continues and continues and then goes through the glass and smashes through the glass, and everybody's, you know, terrified and so on. That scene, that imagery, that camera work, everything, that cinematography, whatever you want to call it, that was the moment that made me want to be a filmmaker. And then the rest of the film on top of it is just perfect. The first Evil Dead movie is very different in a way to the rest of them. Well, especially Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, because they went a little bit more on like a horror comedy route. But the first Evil Dead is a pure on horror, pure terror ride. And I absolutely love it. That's why the first one is still my favourite Evil Dead movie. But also part of that is the nostalgia and the impact it had on me because of that scene where the first time I ever saw something like that happen, and my brain was thinking not just of how incredible it looked, but how on earth they did it. Now, obviously, I know how they did it now, thanks to the internet and books and so on, and magazines, and stealing Fangoria magazines when I was a kid. Oops. But that scene is iconography for me in my brain that affected me to the point that it wanted me, or created something in me to want to be able to do that. And that's why, out of everything that the Evil Dead has done and given us, that scene, just those little bits, and obviously that does continue throughout the movie, where they continue to use that, where it's going through the cabin and it's chasing Ash. And once again, you're like, how are they doing this? This is insane. It blew my mind. On a cinematic, technical point, it's incredible that they managed to achieve what they did with no money back then. It's incredible. So it is a moment that has had a huge impact on me, not just for my love of horror, but for my love of filmmaking. It's incredible. So those are 10 moments in horror that have always stuck with me. You know, this journey has been a long one for me. I mean, I'm well old, and so I've been around for a while, and I've been watching horror from a long for a long time from a very, very early age. And I know there's a lot of you out there that are like that as well. So I want to know in the comments your moments. I want to know the first moments that you remember watching a horror that has never left your brain. But also, I want to know if it started you on this journey that you've enjoyed and that you just are so happy to be a part of. Or I want to know if it stopped you in your tracks and whether the first time you watched something like The Exorcist was the last time you watched The Exorcist and why. I want to know. Drop it all in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video, please go and subscribe. I'm trying to bring out more and more videos all the time, but also the next evolution of the channel itself, outside of the podcast and the socials, is going to be exclusive to YouTube. There's going to be some really, really good content, hopefully coming soon or at some point. I just, it's about doing it, isn't it? And I'm working on it all behind the scenes. I'm always working on things to do. And the big step is the YouTube channel. So please subscribe. It's free. It costs you nothing. I hope you really enjoy the content that I bring out. And also, as well as that, make sure you go and check out the Let's Talk Horror channel podcast. It is on any podcast platform, and follow us on any of the socials. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Join us and be a creep.